So as we begin this discussion on Jesus' Last Supper or the Lord's table, when he actually instituted the Lord's table and the discussion that he had with the disciples during that particular event, what I'm going to try to convey, at least today, is I don't know what happened to my title here. It should be a title slide. Anyway, I'll find it in a minute. That this is no ordinary meal. In Jesus' life, this was no ordinary meal. There was something significant about this particular meal that we're going to start discussing. And I hope today to show you that it wasn't just an ordinary meal. It wasn't just them fulfilling their duties. It wasn't just them fulfilling their obligations. It wasn't just what they did. There was something different about this particular meal. And as we get into this, maybe we'll see why, maybe we won't. But the idea is whatever they talked about at that table is also available for us when we go to the table. And we've got to keep in mind that the enemy has to sit and watch. And he may not be happy about having to watch, but if he can't stop you from getting there, he can't stop you from receiving all the benefits of the table. All right, let's get into this. I know we said we're going to talk from John. We need to establish a little background first. So let's look at some of the other accounts and see what is going on here. Matthew 26, 1 and 2. Matthew 26, 1 and 2. After Jesus had completed his teachings, he said to his disciples, "You know that the feast of the Passover begins in 2 more days. That's when the Son of Man will be betrayed and handed over to be crucified." Was he at all unaware of what was going down? He was very, very aware of what was about to happen. The Passover, which had been formerly symbolic, was now about to become real. He was going to become our Passover lamb. So he knew full well what was coming as he began to make preparations for this with his disciples. Drop on down a few verses. This is from a different translation. Matthew 26, 17 through 19. Now, on the first day of bread baked without yeast, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where are you desiring that we make ready for you to eat the Passover?" Now, it didn't say, "Are you going to be eating the Passover?" As if we're not sure if you're going to go or not. We're not sure if you're going to participate or not. But he's saying, where do you want us to get ready to eat the Passover? We know you're going to, and we know you're going to do it with us. Where is all this going to take place? He said, "Be going into the city to a certain individual and say to him, 'The teacher says, my critical epic making time is near. I'm observing the Passover at your home with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had arranged with them and made ready the Passover." Now that's really interesting. Go into the city and a certain individual. Could you give me a little more detail about that? Now, other versions make this a little more clear what he was actually talking about, but how were they supposed to know which individual this was? And how did Jesus know that this guy had a room? Notice Jesus' statement there. My critical epic making time is near. Had he ever used that sort of language before? In general, about his whole ministry, yes, but now he's getting much more specific. Why? What the time to be crucified, time to complete his mission, his ministry, rather than just develop it, continue it, whatever. The real focus of why he came is about to be manifest. But I love that. My critical. Was it critical? Yeah, it was the whole point. It was the whole reason. I love epic making. Epic making. What is an epic? What? A poem? Okay. This is talking about a generational event, something that reflects a change in history. I mean, in history, you go back to the golden epics of periods of time. This was this period of time. It was this epic and I'm probably saying the word epoch. Is that how it's supposed to be said? I'm sorry. Epoch. I'll go with that. Epoch. So this is a significant thing, and Jesus acknowledged it to be a significant thing. And then he goes on, I am observing the Passover at your home with my disciples. He wasn't asking. I'm doing this, and you got to go find this certain individual and tell him that I am coming to his house to celebrate this particular special meal with my disciples. So the disciples did what Jesus said, made the arrangements, and prepared for them to come and eat that meal that night. Let's keep going. Mark's version. Mark 14, 12 through 17. The first day of the supper of bread without yeast was the day to kill an animal. It was for the special religious gathering to remember how the Jews left Egypt. His followers said to Jesus, what place do you want us to make ready for you to eat this special supper? Notice the language there. Eat this special supper. Jesus sent two of his followers on ahead and said to them, go into the city. There's a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. He will go into a house. You say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is the room you keep for friends where I can eat this special supper with my followers? He will take you to a large room on the second floor with everything in it. Make ready for us. The followers went from there and came into the city. They found everything as Jesus had said. They made things ready for the special supper. Let's go back and look at this a little more closely. Where is the room you keep for friends where I can eat this special supper with my followers? He's not as demanding in this account. He's not just saying, I'm going to do this. He's saying, you had this habit, you owner of the house, had this habit of allowing friends and guests to use this room on special occasions. This is one such special occasion. We need to use that room. Most versions say, where is my room or where is my guest room? So there's still just a little bit of, it sounds like being pushy to me. Where is my room or where is my guest room where I can or may eat the Passover with my disciples? Didn't say special supper. Most versions did not say special supper, but just said eat the Passover. So, okay, the first part of the prophecy, go in, find the guy carrying the jar of water and follow him. That's a little more helpful than a certain individual. So I'm glad that this author gives us kind of a different picture of what's going on. Now, could the guy carrying the water jar being a special certain individual? Yes. So it's not a conflicting argument, but this gives a little more detail, makes it a little easier for them to be obedient and do what is necessary here. All right, Luke's version. Luke 22, 7 through 13. Y'all doing all right? Luke 22, 7 through 13. They came to the day of unleavened bread, a holy day when the special lamb called the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus chose Peter and John and gave them instructions. Jesus, go and make all the necessary preparations for the Passover meal so we can eat together. Peter and John, where do you want us to make preparations? Jesus, when you enter the city, you'll encounter a man carrying a jar of water. Just follow him wherever he goes. And when he enters a house, tell the homeowner, the teacher has this question for you. Where is the guest room where I can share the Passover meal with my disciples? Now, again, I'm not saying that these people got this wrong or whatever, but Luke is saying this is more of a question. Jesus isn't making a demand at all. He's asking a question. Can I use your room? I know you've got this room, and I know that on occasion you've made it available. Can I use it? He'll show you a spacious second-story room that has all the necessary furniture. All the necessary furniture. I hadn't thought about that in this whole process. It's not just a matter of having a room that's big enough. You've got to have enough table, chairs. Now, it's not table and chairs like we think of them, but whatever their concept of table, chairs, serving stations, whatever that was, this had to have all the necessary furniture. That's where you should prepare our meal. They did as he said and found everything just as he said it would be. They prepared the Passover meal. Most versions here say the guest room and not my guest room. This single version said share the meal instead of eat the Passover meal. One said conduct the Seder. And then again, the NLV, which is what we read before, says special supper. But not all the versions agree on that language. So was this a special thing or not a special thing? We know that it was. How do we know that? What makes this one different than all the rest? Did he give, go ahead, I'm sorry. It was last, and we know that that's what makes it more important. But how did Jesus treat this one differently than all the rest of them to let us know that there's something going on that's unusual? Okay. He didn't do that on the others. Wherever they happened to be on whatever night that was where they celebrated the other events, but he wanted a special location for this one. Anything else that you see right away? Okay, let's go on. Again in Luke, dropping down a few verses. Luke 22, 14 through 16. And when the hour came, so the disciples have gone, they've met the guy carrying the water, they entered his room, they got permission or authorization or whatever to use the room. They found all the furniture there, they organized it in the right order, they got all the preparations, they brought all the stuff, they got everything ready. The meal is ready to commence. So now they're starting the meal. When the hour came, Jesus reclined at the table and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly and intensely desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I shall eat it no more until it is fulfilled by the kingdom of God. I'm sorry, in the kingdom of God. Let me say this again. 16. For I say to you, I shall eat it no more until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Before we talk about Jesus' state of mind during this dinner, we need to mention verse 16. We need to spend just a little bit of time here. Jesus promises that he won't eat the Passover meal again until they eat it together in God's kingdom. Until when? Who is they together in heaven? Okay, so as soon as the last disciple showed up, they got to do the meal? When is this meal? What is this meal talking about? I'll get to that in just a second, but that's where our mind is going here. Here are some other versions of verse 16. For I tell you, it is certain that I will not celebrate it again until it is given its full meaning in the kingdom of God. I tell you this, I will not eat another Passover meal in this world. Now it is a picture, but when God begins to rule in his kingdom, then this meal will become real. I will eat it again then. Go ahead, Floyd.
Kind of tying it back to the question that you asked before, what made this meal different? In Matthew, Jesus made the statement, my time is at hand. And so time in the Greek is kairos.
Okay.
Unlike chronos, which is the time on our watch. Kairos is a set time. So this time has been set before the foundation of the world. Jesus was slain. So this time was already set even before the earth began. There was a set time that Jesus was going to die. And so it took the world and all the creation thousands of years to catch up to that time. But that time was already set.
That's good.
And it's the same thing with this meal that he says he's not going to eat until the kingdom is fulfilled. There's a set time for that. Mm-hmm. And when we catch up, then boom, that meal will come again.
Okay, that's good. Now this thing's a picture. Now this thing is symbolic. Now he was about to fulfill it, but he doesn't even say, I'm about to fulfill this. He's saying when God begins to rule in his kingdom, Now, was that going to happen after Jesus went to the cross? Well, to a degree, but that's still not really God ruling in his kingdom. The kingdom of God is still a very small percentage of what all is going on in the world right now. So I wouldn't say that God is really ruling in the portion of the world that is his kingdom. Yes, he's ruling that. But when you compare that portion to what all is going on in the world, his kingdom is not really in charge. So this, not yet. Yes. So this can't happen yet until he is ruling in his kingdom. Are we good? All right, let's keep going. For I tell you now that I won't eat it again until what it represents has occurred in the kingdom of God. Until what this meal represents has occurred in the kingdom of God. So that means it hasn't occurred yet. And there's something, and it's going to be a noticeable, tangible, evidential change that's got to occur before it meets the fulfillment requirement, and then he can participate and eat this thing again. I promise you that the next time we eat this, so you and me together, we will be together in the feast of God's kingdom. Go ahead.
Just correct me if I'm off the wrong track, but is this prophetic talking about his return
Yes.
as king?
Yes.
And is this going to be the setting before his family?
Yes. Well,
no, yes, no.
the enemies won't be there at that meal.
Well, he will, is that, so that this is after his vanquish. That he's vanquished.
We could argue about the eschatology of it. Right. Right. Okay. I can see that both ways, and I'm not.
Okay, but I'm on the right track.
You are on the right track. Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. To clarify what he's talking about, I believe that this future meal is the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is when the church, his bride, joins him in heaven. And then at that point, during that occasion, during that event, he once again partakes of this meal, because that is the reality. Now, we could get into, is that during the tribulation? Is that after the and I'm not getting into that, because that could go in a whole bunch of different directions. I don't really care.
It doesn't matter.
I'm going to be at that meal whenever that meal occurs.
Yeah.
And most of you are probably in that same boat. Whenever this is talking about, I'm going to be there, and we'll get to watch it unfold right before our very eyes. So this future event, this future meal, when God's kingdom begins to rule, when this is no longer symbolic, but it's reality, at that point, Jesus is going to eat this meal again with these disciples. You could look that up, the marriage supper of the Lamb. You could look that up in Revelation 19, 6-9, if you wish. It's not my intention here to get into the eschatology about when, where, how all this occurs. At this future meal, Jesus will once again partake of the Passover with one drastic difference. The things in the Seder will no longer be prophetic, but be the experienced reality of everyone around the table. I'll say that again. The things, the elements in the Seder. Now, have you guys participated in the Seder when we do the Seder? Isn't that cool, all the symbolism and all that stuff? Now, it must have been very different when Jesus held this particular Passover with his disciples. I bet he broke some of the convention from the way they had experienced it all these years before. I bet he said some things differently. I bet he did some things maybe in a different order. There was probably something unique about this particular event. And it's even going to be more unique on that meal in the future when he eats this again, because at that point, none of this is prophetic anymore. At that point, all the elements are the experienced reality of everybody gathered around the table. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at the table. Okay. One Wednesday night recently, when we were doing the communion during the worship or prayer service, the whole idea of the Lord's table struck me differently as I thought about this verse in particular. We're told about communion to remember the Lord's death as often as we do it. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. But the thing that struck me that night was, what's Jesus's perception on this? Does Jesus want to remember what he went through on the cross? I don't think he does. for us to remember what he did. But now look at Jesus' thing. He's just said, I will not eat this meal again with you until we all get to eat it together and this thing is a reality. So when we do communion, we're supposed to remember what he did to start that whole plan in motion. What is he thinking about? And the thing that struck me that night was he is looking expectantly towards that future meal. When he once again gets to participate with his bride, with the people that he gave his life for, and reap, enjoy, participate in the fulfillment of this meal and not just what was coming. So when we are remembering, and I'm not trying to make this light or sacrilegious or whatever at all. I'm not diminishing it by any means. It's a very reverent, it's a very special, it's a very sacred thing when we partake in communion. But Jesus's perspective on that is looking forward to that next meal with eagerness. If he was eager to eat this meal with them, knowing I'm about to go to the cross, how much more eager that next meal when the cross is already well in the rearview mirror and now he's reaping the benefits of going to the cross. Does that kind of change your perspective about, wow, geez, that's awesome?
I wouldn't know about Jesus. I always, you know, I just think what the church says, examine yourself. I wouldn't think from Jesus' perspective.
And he gets excited about the fact that, okay, they're remembering once again what I did. That was painful. I don't really want to think about that. But because of what I did, now they're in relationship with me. They're in the family with me. And they're coming along to that future event and they're going to be around the table. I just thought that was cool. That
it is cool.
So let's go back to the current verse and look at the attitude that Jesus had about this particular meal. It's probably safe to apply all of these attitudes to his current intent and then share it with that intent with us one day. So if he was that desirous and anxious and excited about sharing this meal with them, can you imagine how excited he is about the future meal with all of us? So all those things that we're about to read that Jesus was thinking about this meal, take those and say, that's how I feel about that future meal. Maybe times 10, maybe times 100. I don't know, but it's at least the same and probably a greater extent. All those emotions, all those thoughts, all those desires for the current meal versus the future meal. Everyone still with me? All right. Verse 15 from some versions. I have fervently desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffered. Fervently desired. I have really wanted so much to celebrate this Seder with you before I die. I have very much wanted to eat this Passover meal with you before I suffer. I greatly desired to eat this Passover meal with you before I suffer. I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. With all my heart, I've longed to eat this Passover with you before the time comes for me to suffer. I've looked forward to this hour with deep longing, anxious to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. I've longed with passion and desire to eat this Passover lamb with you before I endure my sufferings. It has been my deep desire to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. Was this an ordinary meal in Jesus' mind? Was this him just going through the ritual of we're supposed to do Passover every year? Was there something different about this? In all these verses, he's saying, I eagerly desire, I deeply desire, I intensely desire before I suffer. He knew the suffering was coming, and yet he's not even really focused on the suffering. He's focusing on, I'm looking forward to this meal. Now, I don't know that I could have made that separation. If I'm approaching this and I know what's coming, I think my focus is going to be on what's coming and not on this meal.
I mean, I don't know if you ever watched any videos about a prisoner going to an execution. You don't see that they're just, unless there's been an saying.
Right.
You don't see a lot of joy going now, and they try to postpone it. There, you know, there's a video of, they said this guy with his last meal, he had a last meal and a request. Well, he requested to watch all the Lord of the Rings extended versions, and it delayed his execution for hours.
Yeah,
Because he didn't want to die.
right.
This is the opposite.
Yeah, it took like 3 weeks to run to watch.
But Jesus is saying, I'm eager wanting to go into this because, yeah, I see.
I'm eagerly to get into the meal.
Yes.
I'm not real eager about this other stuff that's coming,
Right.
but I know it's coming. And because I know it's coming, I'm eager to do this.
I want to say he was looking forward to his death. I'm just saying that he's eager about this meal because you know the significance of it and where it's coming.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, like basically like not necessarily on the suffering of him dying, but what comes from it.
Right.
Saved from it.
Okay.
Like say, us having the meal with him, that time comes for us to all come to him. So I think that's probably where his mind was of that, because like I said, in our human mind, we're like, we're done.
But he,
Yeah.
but he loves us so much.
Yes.
I mean, that's just, yeah, we can't fathom that kind of love. It's just, you know, first of all, yes, it's sacrifice, but I mean, he loves us so much. It's like, yes, this meal, go prepare it. Let's go have this meal.
And he's changing the whole history.
Yeah, he's epic making,
I just
epoch
never
making.
Never thought to look at Jesus. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
It, a moment of his perspective, when he goes to pray, how he says like.
In Gethsemane, yes.
Yeah. Way
And
up.
all the emotional things that the scriptures account for him. Yeah. But all that comes later. All that comes in just a moment. Right now, he's fully focused on this meal. Do you think he's going to say some things in this meal that are significant,
Absolutely.
that are important?
Absolutely.
And we probably ought to pay attention to what is about to transpire because this is significant to Jesus. Now, Passover was a special celebration every year. Ever since it was instituted, it was a special celebration. It was one of the 3 feasts that Jewish males had to participate in every year in Jerusalem. Let's read that verse. Deuteronomy 16:16. 3 times each year, every male Israelite must appear before him in the place he chooses for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, for the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, and for the Festival of Shelters, Tabernacles. Don't come empty-handed. So every Jewish male had to go to Jerusalem or wherever the place was in this particular time frame. It's in Jerusalem to do Passover, to do Pentecost, and to do Tabernacles every year. Was Jesus a good Jewish male? Did he do this every year? All 3 feasts. Otherwise, you could say by the law, he sinned. We know he didn't sin. So for him to have kept this verse, he had to do it all 3 years of his ministry and all 33 years of his life. Everyone good? Okay. So if he had to go visit Jerusalem 3 times a year, are there records of him celebrating the Passover the other 2 years, excluding the one that we're actually talking about, the one where he died? There are. Let's look at those. Luke 2:41-43. Every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, a special time to thank God. When Jesus was 12 years old, they went to Jerusalem for the feast as they always did. Who's they? Jesus, Joseph, and Mary. So who is fulfilling this here? Joseph was also a good Jewish male, and he had to also visit Jerusalem 3 times per year for the 3 feasts. So this particular time at 12, Jesus goes with him like he usually did. And we get this encounter of Jesus going into the tabernacle or into the temple at 12 and discussing things with the religious leaders. 43. After the days of the feast were finished, they started home. But the boy Jesus stayed in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. And this is one of the few accounts that we have of Jesus before his ministry. I mean, his birth, 8 days of his dedication and his circumcision, this account at 12, and then there's nothing else until he starts his ministry at 30. So this is one of the few things that we get to glimpse into the childhood, adolescence of Jesus. And what's he doing? He's in the temple, but the reason that he's in the temple, he should have been there talking about his father's business, but the cause was his father had to do the Jewish ritual of going to Jerusalem for Passover. Okay. John chapter 2, 13 through 17. Now, before I get into this, what happens earlier in John chapter 2? Does anybody know? What's John chapter 2 about? The wedding in Cana. Jesus turned the water into wine at Cana. What was significant about that particular event? It was his first miracle. It was the beginning of his public ministry, if you want to call it that way. And he still didn't think it was time, but anyway, we got there. So John 2, 13 through 17. So he had just turned the water into wine. It was almost time for the Jewish Passover. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle, and he scattered the coins of money. I just saw the, what? Why? Why did you have that reaction?
Because it was an aggressive act.
Okay.
And he was offended of what they were doing.
Right.
In his temple.
Yes. This is one of the most emotional encounters that we have of Jesus. One of the most, I'm going to say human encounters that we have of all the encounters with him.
Righteous.
Yeah.
And this is kind of one that always messes up all the theology about, oh, he was always a nice guy and he never did anything violent and he was accepting of everything and loving and gentle and kind. And anyway, there's another thing that causes people to take note here. In their place. And he does that in all the Gospels. We just don't see it. We have been so brainwashed that we don't really recognize the fact that Jesus wasn't putting up with anything from anybody.
The first time I have read or seen that he made a whip out of cords. I've never seen that before.
Okay, I've seen that in some of the other accounts. Most people go to the fact that he cleaned out the temple during his last week. This is at the very beginning of his ministry. So what's going on? He did it twice. He cleaned them out at the beginning, and then he did it again at the end, his last week. Both of them around Passover. Okay, I didn't finish reading it. I'm sorry. Money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a market." His disciples, remember that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Earlier in John chapter 2, Jesus turned water into wine. He started his ministry. He cleansed the temple near the beginning. I also believe he did it a second time after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem for the last Passover that he would celebrate. If you want to, see Mark 11, 15 through 18. Luke 9, 45 through 47. And Matthew 21, 12 through 17. Mark 11, 15 through 18. Luke 9:45 through 47, and Matthew 21:12 through 17. Those are three more accounts of him cleansing the temple. Now, I think all three of those are referring to the same account which happened at the end of his ministry, after the triumphal entry. This account in John, the account is similar, but the location of John leads me to believe he did it twice. He did it at the beginning and he did it again at the end. Everyone okay? My point is that during the first Passover of Jesus' ministry, where was he? Where was the temple? In Jerusalem. So what was he doing in the temple in Jerusalem at Passover? He was doing what he needed to be doing. He was observing the Passover, and he saw this other junk going on and needed to deal with it. That was the first one. What we're talking about on the Last Supper is the third one. John 6:1-4. So John 2 was the first one. John 13 is the third one. Does it make sense that John 6 is the second one? John 6:1-4. A huge crowd, many of them pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem for the annual Passover celebration, were following him wherever he went to watch him heal the sick. So when Jesus went up into the hills and sat down with his disciples around him, he soon saw a great multitude of people climbing the hill looking for him. Now this goes on into the feeding of the 5,000. Why were these people gathered? Part of it was for Passover. Part of it was they had seen the great works that he did, and now he's starting to develop a following. They just wanted to see the next miracle. But some of that crowd was there for Passover. So the first Passover, he went to Jerusalem, he cleaned out the temple. This is the second Passover of his ministry. Great multitude of people all heading towards Jerusalem, some of them just wanting to follow the bandwagon and see what he's going to do next. But anyway, this passage, it doesn't say that he specifically that he went to Jerusalem, but I have no reason to believe that he didn't. If you go on down into this thing, chapter 7 begins with Jesus preparing to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's 6 months after Passover. So it doesn't say in chapter 6 that he went. It doesn't say that he didn't go. I cannot imagine a reason why he wouldn't go to Jerusalem for Passover in John chapter 6, even though it's not mentioned that he did. None of the other writers even talk about this. He did go ahead and then it mentions that he went to Jerusalem for Tabernacles that same year, which was 6 months later. So we've got three different accounts of Passover. His ministry was 3 years long. He participated in Passover in one form or another all three times. This gives us an account of him participating in Tabernacles during the second year.
Okay.
Scripture is that?
This is John 6:1-4. The crowd was going to Jerusalem for Passover. It didn't say he went. And then in chapter 7, this is John 6, in John chapter 7, it says he went to Jerusalem for Tabernacles.
Thank you. I was getting confused.
Okay, I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
So it seems to indicate, and it would be really problematic for me if he did not follow the instructions of the law for the honoring and the paying homage at the 3 feasts of Israel every year that he was alive, although we don't have record of the majority of those years. So this idea of Passover, it was a special time because they had to go to Jerusalem. And whenever Jesus went to Jerusalem, usually some things got wild. Usually some things happened. Usually some things occurred. It wasn't just your average Joe Blow going to Jerusalem. There was always some fireworks when Jesus managed to make it to Jerusalem. Not just for Passover, but for any of the feasts that he went there, because he always ends up confronting or dealing with the religious leaders who are all stationed, who all meet in Jerusalem. everyone kind of with me? All right. Again, what made this meal special? No, we're going to be talking about the third one. So what I've shown you is it was a special thing to Jesus each time just because God said do it. And things always happened when he went to Jerusalem. But now we're talking about that third one. Because he's going to change history.
Maybe that's,
Okay.
Maybe that's why, and that he instead of coming out of Egypt or.
Okay.
bloodshed of the- Whatever.
I'm going to show you the significance of what Passover really is. Okay. As we go forward, and I'm going to give it to you as homework in just a minute, is think about why this meal was significant. Think about why this one was more special than any of the rest. To help with that, I'm going to give you some homework. Read the account of the Last Supper in all the places where the accounts occur. Of course, you can read before and after and get context if you need to, but try and figure out what was Jesus thinking? What was he feeling? Why was this one special? Why was this one different? The places where you can read about what we're referring to as the Last Supper are Matthew 26, 1 through 35, Mark 14, 1 through 31, Luke 22, 1 through 38, John 13, 1 through 38, and 1 Corinthians 11, 17 through 34. Don't need to read those again. Don't take pictures. I'll send out the notes later. What I want you to do is read all those accounts, and you can read before or after as much as you'd like. Read all those accounts and think about, why is this one special? Why is this one different? What is going on in Jesus's mind? What emotions are Jesus feeling? What is unique about this particular occurrence of Passover? He said he eagerly desired, he deeply desired, he intently desired to celebrate this one with his disciples. Why? I don't know that there's a right answer. I don't know that there's a wrong answer, but I want you guys to just think about it. What is going on in his head? What is going on as he begins to look towards the cross, as he begins to think about all this stuff, as he begins to head in that direction that makes this meal different from all the rest? This is not just a normal occurrence of Passover. There's something different about this one. What is it? And really where I'm going with that is the Lord led me, I believe, to do an entire circle on this one meal and what he talked about during this meal. Why? What is so important about this meal? What is so different about this meal that John would devote 5 chapters to the meal itself and the discussion after the meal?
Are you asking us now?
I'm not, that's your homework. That's what I want you to think about. And as I read into this, as I start digging into this, I'm still unsure of the totality of the answer. But you should at least be able to see, what was Jesus trying to get out of this meal? What was he trying to convey during this meal? What was his motivation? What was his thought process? What was going on with, it would be presumptuous for us to assume that we could ever fully understand what was going through his head, but we can at least start to put some pieces.
It's okay to think that.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't ever presume to know the totality of this whole.
But again, I think that you're so focused on yourself that I'll put it this way, I've been so focused on stuff, and I would have never thought what was Jesus thinking about?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's just the way I look at it, like, ooh, here we are, self-centered.
He made the statement, I've eagerly desired this.
Yeah.
Why?
He does tell you to examine yourself, so you're not
Right.
wrong for examining yourself, but then again, you're like, well, wow, what was Jesus thinking?
And then how does that translate as we get into this? How does that translate into what did he say during this particular event that was so different from what he had previously said? What gave him the opportunity to say it differently, to say it stronger, to say it more clear, to say it however, whatever the difference was versus how he had been talking prior to this evening?
Seems like that tells us stuff that, you know, this day is coming, or, and.
Right.
Sometimes stuff about it here.
Right. And now it's finally here.
It's here, it's like, they don't even believe it.
Correct, yeah, right.
It's like, hey,
Right.
it's straightforward, this is it, you know, and then they're like, you know.
But
shocked.
why did Jesus need to do that? Why did he need to make it clear to them? Why did he need to, one more time, try to get through their thick skulls what was going down and what was going to change as a result of what was about to happen? And that's kind of the framework for where we're going with the rest of this.